Hi, I'm Fionn Wright, your China Dream coach for entrepreneurs and executives. Welcome to Season 1 of the Your China Dream Virtual Summit. In this episode, we have Nitin Dani, founder of Green Initiatives, which was awarded Shanghai's most innovative nonprofit and has organized over 350 events for over 25,000 people. Let's find out how he has managed to make such a meaningful impact.
My name is Nitin Dani. I've been in Shanghai for about 8 years. I'm the founder of Green Initiatives, an environmental organization and Giga focused on healthy buildings. My number one advice for anyone coming to China would be that if you aim to be an entrepreneur or start your own business someday, then spend at least 3 to 6 months learning the language. I think this would be really priceless as you grow your business and as you grow your organization in the future. Learn Mandarin 5 days a week for 3 to 6 months, and you will reach a level, on the language and understanding of the culture that will help you all the time. But if you're coming here just for a job, then my only suggestion would be try to do more for the community rather than just being involved in your job. My number one advice for anyone who wants to achieve the China dream would really be, don't just think about what you can get from China, what can China give you, but I think about what can you offer to China, what value do you bring to China, how can you do more, how can you give more. And I think that's a very, very different mindset, because a lot of people here come to take something away from China, to exploit the resources and the availability of things here. But if you can actually give back something here, I think you will not just make your China dream much more valuable, but I think you will make the China dream of billions of people here a lot more valuable as well. So I would say focus on what you can offer, not what you can get.
So thanks for taking the time today to have this conversation.
Pleasure.
So I want to start with, for the people who are watching who don't know who you are or what it is that you do, if you do like a quick self-introduction.
So my name is Nitin. I've been in Shanghai for about 8 years. I'm originally from India. My background is in architecture. I graduated as an architect in India, and then I worked for a couple of years in Singapore. I was actually active as an architect during the financial crisis in Singapore, and Singapore being the hub of the world in a way. It's such a key point, right? Such a key location. I think it was really badly affected by the financial crisis, and a year and a half, 2 years in Singapore by that point of time. I was also I had a much better understanding of my own life and what I wanted to do. It was my second job after my graduation as an architect. I really enjoyed the work I was doing in India, but I wasn't really enjoying the work I was doing in Singapore. A lot of it had to do with people, the place, the culture, or lack of it, or lack of warmth in people, and all these things. And my initial goal of going to Singapore was really to work with one of the top 3 architecture companies there. But during the financial crisis, they all stopped freezing. They all froze hiring, and then I knew that it wasn't going to happen. And I think for me the milestone, not the milestone, but the key threshold was really just the point where one of the main projects that I was working on in my company that kind of got delayed because of the crisis and lack of funds, and I got laid off. And I think for me that point is very, very crucial in my life, because a lot of times in life you know that this is not the right thing to do, or that's not the right thing to do, and you just don't have the courage to take the decision. And at that point of time, it's good when someone else takes a decision for you. So in this case, the company and my fate took the destination for me, and I think it was one of the best things to happen to me. And then I moved to Milan to do my master's in design management. I was there for a year. It was the best time in my life. I always say that Milan or Italy is a point in my life which taught me that I should not be, or I do not need to be slogging my ass out all through my life to make money. Work has to be about enjoyment. Money will come along the way, and even if you're not a millionaire, if you're enjoying what you're doing, it's okay. And I think a lot of it the credit for that goes to the Italian lifestyle, right? I'll have my coffee no matter what. I'll have my croissant, my beer, no matter what. So I think that played a really, really key element in my kind of thinking. I traveled a lot. I learned a lot. So that was a great starting point for me. And then I came to Shanghai in 2010. Initially just as an intern, and as a master's intern. And then I realized in my very first few days here that what we knew about China back in India is very different to what China is inside China. which I think connects very, very closely to your, to what you've been working on as well, right? In India, there's so much of prejudice, either in the media or just in different communication channels about what China is. And never in my wildest dream could I have imagined that China is actually very different. Of course, Shanghai is very different from the rest of China, but even then, China as a whole is very different from what you hear back in India. My initial rationale for coming to China was, come on, I'm Indian, why would I go to China? I would rather just go back to India. But then since I have this opportunity, I'll go there for 3 months and I'll come back, and that was my original thought, right? And I came here and it was such a different thing, right? Such a different world. And in my first few days, I was like, this is where I need to be. Because I had to take a decision also for the future, in a sense that, should I go back to India? And I just left that a few years ago. Do I want to go back? Am I ready? And I was not ready, for sure, right? For one thing, I cannot deal with the traffic in India. It's the worst thing ever, I do not want to spend my life dealing with traffic every day. The other thing was Italy, right? Financial crisis had really badly affected Europe. So I knew that even if I went back to Europe, I could not do much. So the only logical decision for me was to stay back in Shanghai, and there was a lot of opportunities. And I realized that for a city and for a country growing at such a rapid pace, there was such a disregard for general environmental issues. And even though at that point of time I was not a very strong environmentalist, I had some very, very basic background. And it's just the fact that I just thought a lot of things could be done here at the scale at which it was growing. And for me, the most astonishing point was the fact that it's such a huge country, so many people, such a huge city. But when you compare it with India, it has been managed so well. Shanghai is so safe, it's the safest city in the world, I would say, for the size of people and the infrastructure they're dealing with. So I think all these things kind of just brought me here and made me stay here. So I always say that, I came to Shanghai because of bad luck, but I stayed back because of good sense. And it's been 8 years now. Yeah.
So you mentioned there about your ideas about what China was like before you came here. I'd like to tap a little bit into that in terms of what were some of the assumptions that you had about China before you arrived, and then how those assumptions changed after having been on the ground here.
Right. If I look at two main things, right, main issues, I would say, I think one is food, right? For an average Indian, I would say most Indians, a lot of Indians are vegetarians, right? And sometimes in these National Geographic channels or these documentaries and these things, you see maybe an Asian person eating an insect or or reptiles or whatever, right? So for some reason, Indians have this mind block that a Chinese person eats everything, and they actually have this funny kind of joke flying around in India that and a Chinese person will eat anything that crawls, So I think that was one thing. The fact that it's not that crazy as people make out to be. That's one thing. I think the second thing is also just there's so much of talk of communism and lack of freedom and so on and so forth in the media in India. And when you come here, you realize, it's not that way. It's something else. It's a different kind of regulation, a different kind of control. Which is required when you're dealing with such a huge population of people. And which is what we don't have in India, right? We have 1.3 or 1.2 billion people in India who all have their own opinions, and as a result, nothing happens, right? And here we have 1.4 billion people, and there is a lot of stuff happening. And somewhere, there is a compromise that has to be made, and I think China decided to make that compromise, and it's been doing well because of that. So that was the second thing. And I think the third thing was that in India, if anything is cheap and which breaks very easily, right, they would say it's China made. It might be made in India, but if it's something that is very cheap and breaks very easily, they say it's made in China. And I thought, okay, anything that's China made is scrap stuff. But when you come here, you realize that even here, anything that is scrap will break easily and is cheap. But if you pay a good price, you will get good stuff. Yes, there are times when it may not happen, but by and large, and a cheap thing here will break quickly, an expensive thing, good stuff will last long. So it's not about China-made stuff being cheap and so on and so forth. It's just that people from India or the businessmen from India who come here to import stuff, they are so cheap. They buy the cheapest stuff, they go there, they sell it, and they say it's China-made, right? So I think these few things were, for me, some of the earliest kind of realizations. And even today, I feel that if you want good stuff, you can get it here. You'll have to pay a lot more money, but you'll get it. So it's not just about cheap China-made stuff.
What are some of the personal challenges, difficulties, obstacles that you've had in your time here in China, and how did you overcome them?
I think one challenge, which was, I think it's still there till date, but I think people here are very brand conscious in a way, or very Western conscious in a way, To them, anything that is white or anyone that is white is amazing, And even if it means a Polish person teaching English, or a Russian speaking English and teaching English, they're okay with it, even if the English is crap, as opposed to an Indian person who speaks one of the most grammatically perfect English in the world, and they're not okay with it because it's all about the accent, it's all about the face. And initially, when I was here, I was of course trying to do an additional job here, an additional job there to make money, but it was not possible to do it as an English teacher, even though I felt I'm a good teacher and I'm good in English because I was brown, And people somehow had this thing that, hey, I want to have a Western accent, Australian accent, British accent, American accent, People are crazy about that accent. And till date, you would see people who've not left the country, but they would speak in such an accent that you're like, what? Why do you have such a strong accent? And you just realize that they just trained themselves that way. So I think this was just one of the things. I think apart from this, I think for me, my first job was in a Chinese company. And it was great because I learned a lot in that company, but it was really, really challenging from a language perspective, right? I mean, I was the only foreigner in the company, apart from my other boss, in the first company. It was a branding and design agency, and I was working with international companies who all spoke English, but I was working with local designers in the team, right? And then there was always, it's hard to kind of bridge that gap sometimes, or be able to get that work out of your designer who's local for a client who's Western without having a certain level of communication, in the local language. I mean, I think I did pretty okay, but I think it could have been a lot better if I spoke a certain level of language. And for me, the challenge was that when I came here, I already had a job, right? Of course, I was not getting paid a lot, but in fact, I was getting paid less in Shanghai than I was getting paid 2 years ago before my master's in Singapore. So I took a huge pay cut, like more than 50% pay cut, to work here. But I said, you know what, I'm just learning. And I think generally the pay here, could really vary between two different kind of companies and two different profiles. There's a huge variation in pays. But I think more than that, I think it was also the language element, the cultural element was quite difficult. And for me, I really wanted to kind of learn the language much more in depth, but back then I had this job which was really busy and stressful, and I was not getting paid a lot of money, and I wanted to learn the language like really, really. It's in silent mode already, and it's spam. Sorry, I'll just airplane mode it too. I really wanted to learn the language, but I think on one hand I had no time. It was such a busy and stressful job. On the other hand, I did not have enough money. And I felt that if you really want to learn the language, you have to do those 4 or 5 days a week intensive, do it every day, 3-4 hours, and then you follow it up with the homework, and that's the best way to learn the language. I think spend the first 3 to 6 months in that student mode, and that's when you can get the language right. Otherwise, it's very, very hard to get to a certain level. So I feel those were a few challenges that I felt. But I think I stick to my decision. And I think one thing that really, really helped me deal with it was just changing my mindset. Sometimes just a very, very small change in your mindset can really make a big difference. Like, I think for me, the challenge was I was getting paid really less, right? And of course, as a city, it's an expensive city. And I told myself that maybe my employer thinks that he's paying me less and he can make use out of me. But maybe I shift the table around and I say, hey, you know what, you think you're paying me less and making use of me, but maybe I'm making use of you because I'll learn all I can in the next 1 year and I'll leave, and then you will not find someone like me, So sometimes really changing your mindset a little bit really helps a lot. And I think for me, that mindset change really helped me because I didn't feel like I was getting used. I felt like I was using someone else to learn whatever I could, And I built a lot of connections, a lot of contacts, a lot of friends as a result of that. So I think it was still a good decision to stick to the job for 1 year, even though it was really, really stressful. Yeah.
You're talking there about learning the language and the culture, and I'd love to hear more about that. How important do you think it is to be able to speak Chinese if you want to do business or work here? And how important is understanding the culture?
It's something, if you can do it, it's the best thing you can do. The language and the culture. Spending your first 6 months really deeply understanding the culture, how people think, how people work, what motivates them, what doesn't motivate them. How should you behave in a public gathering, how should you not? I think it's absolutely important. Unfortunately, there's not many people who teach you that here. There's not a lot of crash courses for that. But hopefully if you join a good language school where you learn the language in the right way, I think that becomes a part of the learning. I think it's really important. I mean, it's been 8 years for me now, and I guess I have 2 jobs and I'm running a business. and I'm able to do it fairly okay. But I think I could have done a lot better job if I spoke the language much better. Like right now, my communication is good. Normal conversations are okay, but I can't do a professional presentation. But if I could do that, I would have been a real jackpot. And I think that's where I think it's really big. And if I have one regret, I think I wish I could have been a lot better at the language. But after 2 or 3 years, I said, you know what, I really cannot do this anymore because I have too much work to deal with, and I left the language. But I could have worked a lot more on it, I think. Yeah. But that's where it's usually about when you have time, you don't have the money, and when you don't have time, then you have the money, and it's been like that with me. Yeah.
And so some of those cultural elements that you mentioned, understanding how people think. Well, what have been some things that you've learned about the culture during your time here?
Learning about the culture, I think it's an everyday thing, right? Every day, or every other day, or every other week, there's a new incident that comes up, where you learn something new. I think for me, I've just learned things over a series of different incidents here and there, just interacting with a lot of people. But I think one thing from last year was, we had our first full-time person, and the person was leaving that day, and I really had a very, very busy day that day, and I said, hey, I'm a bit busy today. If you don't mind, shall we just take a walk? We'll get something from Subway, and then we'll talk on the way. It's the last day. I'd like to buy you lunch, but I just want to talk to you before it. And for me, I didn't really focus so much on the food element or what we were eating. That person was vegetarian as well. She was a Chinese staff. But I just said, hey, let's just have a walk and let's just spend some time together and let's talk. That's all I thought about. But she actually got offended that it's actually my farewell lunch, and how can you take me to Subway? And I was like, oh my God, I've never thought about that, And then she said, oh no, I'm not going. I'm going to go do my own lunch. I'm like, okay, I'll join you. And it was just very embarrassing, it was just very weird. And she was a good person, but it just created this weird dynamic. And then I think it's just a very, very small thing, this one, But also there are a lot of different things, that you learn along the way. And I'm not saying that I've learned a lot about it, but I've not focused enough on it. I should have focused a lot more on it.
So tell us a little bit more about what you're doing in your different roles. Like, what is it exactly that you do here, and what's sort of the scope or the industries that you work with?
So, like I said, my background is in architecture, and when I was finishing my schooling, my architectural course, I got involved a little bit more into sustainability. Back then, I decided to design my final year thesis project, as a sustainable residential school. And that was for me a starting point of getting into the environmental kind of movement or sector or whatever. And then I did a little bit of work in India on that, did a lot of restoration work. In Singapore, I worked in the company, and we did a few projects that had some level of environmentalism involved. But I never really, I didn't really look at environmentalism or global warming or climate change in depth, or I did not even have a proper understanding about it. I just thought, yeah, it was a good thing to do, but I didn't really understand it so much more in depth. So when I came in, when I came to Shanghai in 2010, 2011, I just happened to be living with a guy who started this local chapter in Shanghai called Green Drinks Shanghai, and Green Drinks is part of a global organization called greendrinks.org, and they have Green Drinks chapters in different parts of the world. And the basic thing here is that it's very, very casual, informal group of people getting together over a drink and talking about environmental issues. And this guy started this in Shanghai, and I was just happy to live. I happened to be living with him, and he said that, hey, Nitin, I've already been doing it for a year, and I don't feel like doing it more. Maybe you should take the lead. And I began running those activities, and it's back then it used to be called Green Drinks, and we rebranded it a few years ago to Green Initiatives. But Green Initiatives as an overall organization is one of my jobs. What Green Initiatives focuses on is really, on one hand, it focuses on education, on learning, on environmental issues, because I feel that even today, we are all grown up, we have professional jobs, we're working in big companies, small companies, all kinds of companies. But if there's something we never learn about consistently enough, is about our relationship with the environment, our relationship with our bodies, our relationship with our mind, our health, And these topics are picking up, whether it's mindfulness, health, nutrition, these are all picking up, but it's still not the norm. And these are things I feel like, even though I studied in a really, really good school in India, I did not have all this information. So I just felt like there's such a huge lacking for this kind of information that we have to consistently and continuously keep sharing these bits of information with the community. So green initiatives, there are 3 or 4 different parts to green initiatives. One is community awareness events. So we've run about 400 events in Shanghai in the last 9 years on environmental education, on sharing new topics, on environmental issues. So this is one thing that we do. And of course, a lot of these events we also do inside companies, with different companies that we work with. The other thing that we do is we also realize that education is not just enough, right? I mean, it's a good starting point, but you have to show people the available solutions, the available opportunities. And so what we did was, because we've been in the community for a while, and we've had access to different kind of stakeholders and different businesses, what we did was we started looking at what else could we do from a solutions perspective. And we recognized that waste was a huge problem, and there are people that we know who deal with efficient and transparent waste and recycling. So we started designing projects on recycling waste, not directly through us, but really us creating a project or a framework within which it could happen in a transparent way. Because recycling has been happening for a long time, but there has been no transparency. We wanted to bring that element of transparency and making it more systematic. So we began running projects on textile waste, on electronic waste, now on paper waste. And these are some of our key projects that we've been running right now to really work with businesses and with the community to recycle the waste that is being collected and to really send it to the right location. Because a lot of times people think that, hey, I'm recycling, great. But it's not about, hey, I'm recycling, it's great. It's really about where is what you're recycling going. Because if you don't know where it's going, it could be anything. So I think that's one aspect. I think the other aspect also is, which we combine with education, is we say that recycling is not the solution, it's a last option. I think the key thing to really is to be aware of our own consumption, and where we can cut down, we should cut down, and where it's not possible, then we look at all these kind of solutions. And in the last 1 year, our big focus has also been on plastics. We all know single-use plastics as such a huge catastrophe of our times, right? It's such a huge problem. So we started a project also on really raising the level of awareness on the use of single-use plastics, and also creating either content or toolkits or systems to help companies reduce their single-use plastics. So this is what we do on the solutions side. So these are called impact projects. And the last part is we have an initiative called Seeds of Change. And this is something we've been doing only for the last, I would say, 1.5 years. But the actual framework began about 6 months ago. And for us, Seeds of Change is, again, when we look back at the problem, it's not like people are bad people or people are good people, It's just that people haven't known better, right? How can you create a framework, a sort of more formal, collaborative learning framework for people, whether it's students in schools, whether it's employees in the companies? How can you create a continuous long-term learning framework and system for people to learn, and really about collaborative learning? So Seeds of Change is a program for us that is about collaborative learning, long-term learning, continuous learning, and really about a journey, right? So you start maybe as a bubble maker, but maybe someday you become a professional dive instructor. There is this PADI model in diving, right? There's this different kind of stages that you go through. Maybe you don't know anything about diving, so you're a bubble maker. But as you learn more, you become something else. Then you go to the next level, then you go to the next level, and someday you can start your own diving academy, for example. And I think that even though there is a lot of content globally on environmental education, what is missing is a certain kind of framework, and it's all very independent. What we're trying to do here is really set up a platform for learners and for experts to really share content and kind of share with each other as part of a framework. And when people join these sessions, they also get credits, like learning credits. So this is something we've been doing as part of green initiatives, and a big aspect to all this really is working with companies on their CSR kind of aspects, because a lot more companies now realize that they should be doing more, but there is not enough opportunities for them to do more. There's not enough transparent initiatives for them to do more. And traditionally, CSR has been a very, very expensive subject. Okay, what do you want to do? Okay, let's do CSR. How do you do CSR? Give a few $100,000 here, a few $100,000 there, and in 1 year we'll give you a report. So there has not been very concrete, transparent and affordable kind of CSR projects. So what we really wanted to do was really break down CSR into small parts, into affordable parts. So any company of any size can take the first step, and engage in it and really contribute to the community around. So this is all what we've been doing to green initiatives, and this is one of my jobs. This I've been doing for 7 years, but I have another job as well. It's a company called Giga, And in Giga, what we're doing is really we're trying to create a generation of healthy buildings. Because in the past, we spoke a lot about green buildings, buildings being saving water, saving energy, being really just kind of designed to be green in a way, to operations and so on and so forth. But what we've been doing with Giga, we started a certification called the Reset certification, which is the world's first certification focused on people's health within spaces. So starting with indoor air quality, because people spend 90% of their time indoors, they spend 90% of their time inside offices, and there's a lot of money being spent in designing these offices, a lot of materials being used in these offices. How do we know whether these materials, the air that we breathe, is it affecting us, the environment, the light, is it affecting us or not? Because it is affecting us, and a lot of times it's negatively affecting us. And when your employees are not healthy, they're not productive, and when they're not productive, how can they help you be profitable, right? So it's directly connected to profitability as well. It's just that it's not been measured enough. And what Reset has been focusing on really is creating a standard for companies to achieve healthier offices or healthier buildings. And right now, the focus is a lot on air quality and building materials, but in the future, it also increasing the focus to energy monitoring, to waste, to comfort, and all these different things. Because at the end of it, it's a more holistic, complete thing, and Reset is more focused on performance. So it's the world's first certification that's completely sensor-based. So it's not like, hey, I give you a list of 100 questions and you answer them and you give it to me. Our work is so much based on sensors, so it's based on real-time performance. So you install a sensor, you get the data, send us the data, and we do the analysis. The Reset Cloud does the analysis. So it's completely changed the way certification is being done now, and it's one of the fastest growing certifications globally because it's very, very easy to implement, and it's directly giving people information and data on their projects. And at the end of it, it's also helping companies or building owners increase the value of their property. Because what would have traditionally been a building, now it's a healthy building, and you have all this data to prove it's a healthy building, and suddenly your building is a lot more than just a building. It's a healthy building which is sharing with you a lot of feedback, a lot of data on how it's being operated and how the air quality is being delivered and how the waste is being managed. So it's a much more smarter, healthier building now, which also means that your valuation has increased. So these are the two things that I do with Green Initiatives and Giga, and a lot of my work is really focused on outreach, community development, on a lot of talks and workshops, sort of trainings. So these are the things that I kind of do a lot on.
So if someone's trying to find out more about your work, whether it's Giga or Green Initiatives or attending your events, what's the best place for them to find that, and how could they reach out to you personally?
So for me, I think the best way to reach out to me is they can just reach out to me on LinkedIn. If they go to LinkedIn and type my full name, Nitin Dani, they can find me there and they can connect from me there, and then it's easier to converse. I met some great people because of that, and I think as an organization, so we the Green Initiatives website is greeninitiatives.cn. So all the information is there, all there. But otherwise, if they connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm happy to share with them all that information.
Thank you very much, Nitin. It was very fascinating.